So, hi everyone, can you hear me? Hi Oliver. Okay, so we are starting in 5 minutes. Thank you all for being here and connecting to this meeting.
Now it works.
Hi Chipra.
Hi Camilo. Sorry, it wasn't allowing me to unmute, so I guess you had to change something.
Okay, yeah, I'm solving this right now. I think Oliver, can you mute yourself now?
Now yes. Hello.
Hi.
Good to hear you all. Now I've been unmuted.
Yes. Should we take the chance of muting ourselves again or stay like this?
I think you can do it by yourself, like mute, unmute yourself now. So there is no
now
problem.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it works.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I think I'm just going to start introducing the webinar. I will solve the this issue with the muting and unmuting for our speakers and for our panel as well. So no worries. So thank you everyone for being here. So we are going to start this webinar session. Today we are going to discuss on the role of urban-rural linkages regarding ecosystems, biodiversity, climate change, and land. And for that, we have organized this session together with the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat. And Oliver Hillel, who is working with the convention, is today here. So he's going to be our moderator for this session. So Oliver, thank you for being here. Hi, how are you today? Can you mute yourself now or no? Okay.
Good.
So Oliver,
Yes.
just would like to give you the floor.
Thank you so much
To start this webinar.
Thank you so much, Camilo, and thanks for setting this up. It's great to cooperate with you. It's great to have this wonderful group with us today to discuss the urban-rural linkages. And I think I'd like to basically just welcome all of you and reinforce the pleasure we have as the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity to share this organization of this event with you. And thank you for all the preparations. I think the issue at hand is clear. In my opening remarks, I just really want to emphasize the importance of urban-rural linkages to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So I am speaking, of course, from the perspective of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And basically, I just wanted to say hello, welcome all of you, and invite UN Habitat to begin. I think I believe it would be Shipra, is that right? That would begin with giving us the context of urban-rural linkages, and then I will add the perspective of the Secretariat, and then we will go straight into the presentations. Correct, Camilo?
That's perfectly correct, Oliver. Thank you.
So, Shipra, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. The most famous spoken words. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you again, dear partners, friends, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world joining us today. I'm absolutely delighted to join this on this important event, co-hosted by UN Habitat and the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD Secretariat, to share some reflections on the importance of urban-rural linkages, sustainable and resilient urban and territorial development. Colleagues, can I please request you to mute yourselves if you're not speaking? There's some backbeat, there's some echo. So as Oliver said, just to provide a bit of context, we all know that urbanization is one of this century's most transformative trends. And urban activities, of course, have direct and indirect impact on the natural environment. And their scale of influence typically extends way beyond the urban boundary. Although cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's surface, they use 75% of the world's natural resources, impacting nearby as well as distant territories. Natural habitats are diminishing due to conversion to urban land uses, as well as agricultural uses that are needed to support the food consumption in cities and human settlements. When well managed, of course, however, and this is UN Habitat's position, argument, and I think well rehearsed position, that when well managed, urbanization can be an opportunity for biodiversity conservation as well as enrichment. It can support well-functioning ecosystems, which are vital for the well-being and indeed the very survival of humankind. Besides providing the essential food and water supplies needed for sustaining life on Earth, ecosystems also provide services such as air purification, as well as cultural and medicinal benefits. Urban ecosystems have become important biodiversity hotspots and can act as refuge for several species. For example, the Biosphere Reserve classified Greenbelt of Sao Paulo, Brazil, makes up 21% of the city's territory and is home to 58 wild mammal species, 47% of them endemic, and 288 species of birds. And we see this in several cities across the world. So friends, cities and regions can offer the ways to appreciate and promote the protection of biodiversity and associated ecosystems that sustain all life on Earth. For this to happen, we must actively manage the linkages between cities and the territories on which they depend. We've stopped calling it hinterland, which is good because it's really an integrated urban and territorial approach. Urban, rural, peri-urban, and natural areas all form part of a larger system. Managing these linkages to benefit ecosystems, renew soil fertility, moderate floods, droughts, and temperature extremes is absolutely essential to help people, farms, and businesses, including those also located in distant communities, to conserve resources, to sustain life, and ultimately to enjoy the benefits derived from a healthy environment. Both the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the New Urban Agenda acknowledge the importance of regional and territorial approaches that integrate these urban and rural functions. Managing urban-rural linkages will not only make cities and human settlements safe, resilient, and sustainable, which is of course SDG 11, our mantra, but also support ending hunger and achieving food security and improved nutrition, so that's SDG 2, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, SDG 12, and taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, which is SDG 13. In UN Habitat Strategic Plan, 2 of the 4 focus areas aim to strengthen climate action and improve the urban environment. That's one box, one domain of change that we emphasize. and enhance shared prosperity of cities and regions, which is a second out of our 4 domains of change. Both these can only be achieved if the linkages between urban and rural areas are acknowledged, facilitated, and actively managed. UN Habitat is undertaking 3 key activities in this arena to support member states, local and regional governments, as well as other stakeholders. First, we are supporting and encouraging countries to integrate urban-rural linkages in policies and plans. Just as an example, we have successfully supported Mozambique and Nigeria in building the capacities of policymakers in integrating urban-rural linkages in their policy frameworks. Second, in addition to the policy support, we're also actively raising awareness on urban-rural linkages globally. In 2020, this year, over the course of this year, we've organized a webinar series on this topic covering a wide range of issues: governance, resilience, the role of urban-rural linkages for different sizes of human settlements and vulnerable communities, etc. Particularly in this time of COVID-19. I think COVID-19 has thrown up the issues of urban-rural linkages and the risk of fracturing of these linkages in a very big way. This series was attended by over 2,000 participants, and I hope the messages have gone even further. Finally, in addition to these steps, we are collecting and disseminating best practices on urban and rural linkages. We published a guide on mainstreaming urban-rural linkages in national urban policies, as well as a compendium of inspiring practices, among other resources this year. So friends, colleagues, Oliver, you know, UN Habitat and the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat have worked hand in hand in the past to support decision-making and decision makers at the national level with practical information and advice on how to support and encourage biodiversity action at all levels of government, but national, subnational, and local. We look forward to continuing this collaboration with you, with the CBD Secretariat. We will start by jointly preparing a guide on how the guiding principles for urban-rural linkages can be applied in practice for governments and other stakeholders in the context of CBD and the other 2 Rio Conventions. And I hope we can go beyond the guide and move to supporting countries, cities in practice, stakeholders in practice together. UN Habitat reaffirms its commitment to sustainable urbanization by promoting the management of urban-rural linkages to mitigate the impact of cities on biodiversity and ecosystem services, land, and climate change. I invite all of you present here today to join forces with us and the CBD Secretariat in this endeavor. Thank you very much, and back to you, Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shipra, for your kind words. Thank you also for the support of UN Habitat. And I think just to, we have 5 very interesting speakers coming up, so I want to be very short and to the point. But I think the one thing that I can add to your words, Shipra, is that arguably, urban-rural linkages are the most exciting thing that we can discuss for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a very ambitious plan for the next 10 years that all the countries in the world will try to develop and coordinate for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So there are already 20 targets being discussed. There's already a whole movement. And it clearly calls for the coordination of governance across all levels of governance. So we have recently participated in a study that came out in Nature and that pointed out that just the urban expansion, just the expansion of cities in the next 10 years will probably take 16% of the remaining key biodiversity areas away. Cities are becoming much closer to protected areas, even at the national level, large protected areas. We're seeing this distance become smaller than 50 kilometers on average in the whole world. So cities and protected areas are becoming much closer. But these 16%, they disappear compared to the footprint impact. So if you think what urban consumption and production cause, they affect everywhere. If you think about it, any city of more than 100,000 inhabitants buys issues from the whole world, from all over the world. They will buy food, they will buy extractives from mining. So it is probably several times larger than the 16%, the impact that the increase in consumption and production that cities will have over the next years that will cause on biodiversity. So the impact is huge. And at the same time, of course, the transformative power of educating sustainable consumption production, from urban settlements, is going to be probably the big transformative issue coming ahead. It's what's going to change the game, urban-rural linkages. In terms of food, our choices in food are arguably the biggest choice we can make for nature. In terms of all mining, all extractives, all the services and goods that we consume, but also every procurement and every purchase we can make it more sustainably or less sustainably. This is why urban and rural linkages are so essential. And this is why we really see the upcoming publication with you at UN Habitat and with the participation of many of the people that will speak today as a fundamental breakthrough, because we think this is arguably the most transformative and ambitious direction we can take. So thank you very much for that. And I think without further ado, we could go on straight. Camilo, unless you have other words for the first speaker.
No, Oliver, you can go
ahead. So in that case, Andrew, I'd like to invite you. You have been with us from the very beginning. I remember you in Quito all those years ago, hammering away at the urban-rural linkages. So go ahead, Andrew. Share with us how you see that urban-rural linkages will become an important feature for governance heretofore. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks so much, Oliver. Do I share my screen in order to share the presentation?
Andrew, you are not allowed. You are now allowed to share the screen, so you can do it by yourself, or I can do it for you as you prefer.
Okay. If I can only do it, let's see. How are we now? Quick check from you, Camilo. Is it looking okay?
No, we cannot see.
No. So perhaps, could you help me out? Better now?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Okay, thanks. I'm going to jump right in. As Oliver and Chipper have already said, Habitat has enjoyed a really long and productive relationship with the Convention on Biological Diversity. One of those really intense collaborations was the City Biodiversity Outlook. And that in 2013 yielded a very, very stunning finding that 60% of the area expected to be urban in 2030 had not yet been built. And in 2013, that implied more than a doubling in the physical space of cities. And that's very interesting because that projected growth was much bigger than population growth, which implied a change in lifestyles. It meant people consuming more and more space in generally freestanding buildings, in neighborhoods that depended on cars. In other words, a world that was perhaps less urban than suburban in character, a kind of blurring of urban and rural worlds. Another finding from just 2 years ago was that peri-urban areas, townships often just outside the jurisdictional boundaries of cities proper, would be the battleground for this expansion. This is from Atlas for the End of the World, done by some stellar colleagues of ours at the University of Pennsylvania. And it overlays maps of projected urban expansion, that's the area red on the left, with extent of threatened species, that's the greener area on the right. And it looks at the intersection of these two. You see yellow in the middle, the extreme conflict zones where we've got to focus our work. And I don't think by accident that it is precisely these peri-urban zones just outside jurisdictional boundaries of cities where most of this development is happening. It's often where environmental regulations are weakest, labor laws may be weakest, building codes may not exist, quick profits can be made, and this yields a kind of landscape that's almost accidentally urban. It's a patchwork of disconnected places that really can't be retrofitted in places that have very high per capita rates of resource use and emissions, much more so than the traditional city that we're really advocating for. Around the same time, Habitat and a whole consortium of partners, many of which are here on this call today, developed this guiding principles on urban-rural linkages. And they've asked me to very briefly review these. I'll try to do that in 1 minute. These are a set of common aspirations that the world has basically agreed to, and that gives some indication on how we might achieve these. And I think what will be apparent is that even though we are the United Nations supporting these, their achievements going to require the commitment of levels of government at subnational and local levels, almost even more so than national governments, underscoring the importance of the metropolitan scale. So there are these 10 principles, and they're broken down into nearly 60 actions that are clustered along enablers such as governance, planning, finance, empowerment, and knowledge. And then there's another 30 or so that are clustered on sectoral or thematic areas. That includes actions along the lines of economic development, social service provision, IT, food systems, environmental impact, and conflict and disaster. That's about as quick as I can make it. It's a lot of text. It's a lot of aspirations. One of the things I will say, and this links a bit to what sort of the framing remarks that Shipra made earlier, one of the things we often hear from governments, particularly municipal governments that are guiding a lot of this growth, is the question, which of these recommended principles and actions should we prioritize? Many are not well capacitated to begin with. So the questions are something like, in what order should we take them? Can they be combined in a concrete manner? So I'll try to answer that in the next and final 2 minutes with 3 emerging examples, dealing with 3 kinds of scenarios I think we most often encounter: overbuilt landscapes, not yet built landscapes, and fragmented ones. So for overbuilt, something that we're trying to offer to municipal and subnational governments is urban growth boundaries. They can deliver multiple benefits. These are just 5 that really jumped out at me in the list of guiding principles. But I think the point is that these are co-benefits. A single integrated, often spatial action can deliver much more than an individual one. Just a few examples: urban growth boundary, one of the most famous from the 70s in Portland, state of Oregon in the US, which was recently revised. Here's what it yields concretely on the ground. And it's not just in the developed world. We have an example here in Uberlandia in Brazil. Infill intensification in the core of the city has allowed active commercial agriculture, small agriculture, to still take place just within reach. Second, for unbuilt landscapes, we're working on planned city extensions. Again, multiple benefits to be had from this kind of an approach. We have here an example, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. You see on the left the impact of having planned in advance with proper sites and services of a much more compact, efficient, shared space model than the much more dispersed and inefficient one on the right. Melbourne in Australia did something similar, but they looked actually at the relative vulnerability of natural habitat with not just within the city, but in a consortium of many surrounding municipalities in the metropolitan area, and developed their own plan for where to extend the city in a kind of green and red go, no go diagram that suggested which areas for expansion would be least damaging to peri-urban agricultural and natural areas. Johannesburg, a city we've worked with as well, slightly different tack. They were looking at which directions to extend infrastructure within the city so that the poorly serviced townships where a majority of population live could be better serviced with access to jobs. The two were clustered in a very mismatched way. So these are three ways that planned city extensions can achieve better rural, urban-rural linkages. Last and not least, fragmented landscapes. We've been experimenting with citywide public space strategies. Again, multiple benefits with the approach. We find in many cities that the built-up area, the kind of functional area of the city is often not aligned with the decision-making boundaries, often grossly so. You see two examples here, again, Melbourne on the left and Bogota on the right, can make this kind of thing difficult, but at the very least, what a city can do is to inventorize and to assess the public space that it has at its disposal. These guidelines that we issued at the World Urban Forum just earlier this year, actually in February. And I'm already over time, but I think the point is that by enhancing the quantity, the quality of these spaces, providing better programming and connecting them can portend benefits both for improved ecosystem health and for more equitable access to services both within and around cities. I will leave it at that. Thanks very much. And I pass back to you, Camilo and Oliver. Thanks. Sorry, did you say something, Oliver? How do I stop sharing?
Thank you, Andrew. I think Oliver, you can speak now. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, every time I unmute myself, I cannot, or mute myself, I cannot unmute myself. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. You've been stellar contributor to that, particularly in terms of urban planning and design. What you've just shown is how you can put urban-rural, the consideration of urban-rural linkages and the whole teleconnections and linkages into urban design. And I think the next person we would like to hear is Paul Wander from ICLAC, from one of our regional economic commissions. And I would like to invite you to talk to us about food system and how the food systems relate to urban-rural linkages. Paul, over to you, please. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Hi, thank you very much to you, Oliver, and to Camilo as well, and to the rest of the team. I assume you can hear me.
Go ahead. Yes, we can.
Great. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, thanks again for that introduction, and thank you for the great presentation, Andrew. That's a good setup. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact in the sense that, as Oliver mentioned, I'm going to try to link this in with the food system. The food system is my key area of work, and it has its own challenges, but I think they're very related to the challenges that we have here with regard to rural and urban linkages. You might notice that I've inverted the traditional order. That's just has to do with my perspective. Food systems are circular, but there seems to be a beginning in the rural and an end in the urban. So it's just to kind of change the perspective a little bit. The food system is a complex system that faces an enormous challenge in the coming years. It's the crux of the challenge is to produce more with less, and significantly more with significantly less. FAO estimates that by 2050, we need to increase food production by 50% of the value that was within the last few years. So that's a significant percentage, and that's just based on population growth and changes in taste. So the key question is, how are we going to do that? We can do that in ways that are relatively clean, that go in line with protection of biodiversity, or we can do the contrary. The key inputs that we talk about with agriculture are land, soil, and water, although that's a gross generalization. On land, we can't afford to use any more land for agriculture. Agricultural land growth is one of the key factors in biodiversity reduction. In Latin America, which is a region with the largest biodiversity loss as calculated by some groups, faces significant loss due to agriculture, especially recently in Brazil and Colombia, but those are not the only countries where that is common. Soil degradation is also critical. When we talk about biodiversity, we're not only talking about large things, but we're talking about the tiny particles and the tiny nutrients that exist in our soil, and those nutrients are the key to the food system. So that's where the whole food system begins in some ways, if you take more of a linear approach. But soils are requiring more and more fertilizers. Overuse and mismanagement of soils is a big problem. Water is also a resource that is required at certain geographic points and in certain moments in time, and we can't control those. So water is a resource that in some areas is under incredible amounts of stress, including northern Chile and Latin America, Peru, Lima, some urban centers, Santiago de Chile, where I live, are under significant water stress. So those variables are stressed, and I have a graph here that just shows two paths. On one axis, we have CO2 emissions, which is a good way. It's not the perfect way, but it's a good way to kind of sum up into one variable environmental impacts. And on the other axis, we have growth in agricultural production. What we have to do is get from these last points to the corresponding color of line by 2050, and we can choose to do so in a way that increases emissions, holds emission constant, or decreases emissions. And that's what we're trying to do. As you can see, those challenges will be different for each country, for each region, for each city, and for rural areas as well. Factor growth for food system production varies wildly around the world. There are some general trends. Labor in agriculture is declining. That's due to a variety of factors, but that's true almost all over the world. And that's a key trend that also has strong impacts on the rural or urban continuum related to immigration. Fertilizer use is, for example, has been a key determinant of agricultural output growth in Latin America and in other regions as well. That's due to principally, as I mentioned before, some of the trouble that we have with soils. Agricultural land use growth is slow, but when we're talking about land growth, we're talking about small changes having large impacts. So even, for example, 2% growth in land use can have a significant impact environmentally. Now I'd like to bring it back to the question at hand, which is how does this system fit into the urban-rural dichotomy that we've kind of developed here? The trends that have been mentioned previously, which are increasing percentages of the population that are urban, increasing resource use of those populations, they have a significant impact on the agricultural system and the food system in general. They grow gaps. In general, if we again oversimplify things, rural areas are areas of food production, and really not much else. There's some areas with tourism as an economic driver. There's some other natural resources that provide economic opportunity, but very little has been made outside of those areas. Urban areas have a majority of the food consumption. They're offered jobs that are usually high value added. And there's also a significant transport cost and value chain costs that are associated with urban consumption. So when we're talking about increasing the urban and reducing the rural, we're talking about increasing all these things that put pressure on the food system. And just agriculture remains key in rural areas. It's a large but declining share of agricultural jobs, and it is by far the share that has a higher percentage of its workers in rural areas. It's 80% worldwide. So whenever we talk about these divides, we need to take those gaps into consideration. Another key gap, and because of the short time, we have to reduce it, but the change in taste. When you're talking about an urbanizing society, you're really changing the taste structure of the food that those consumers require. So here we have a fairly detailed description of how those tastes have changed. But in general, when we see, for example, large countries like China becoming increasingly urban, and increasingly economically independent and proactive, we see significant changes in meat consumption, changes in dairy consumption. Those tastes change, and they put increased pressure on the resources. So when we go back to the food system challenge, urbanization is putting more pressure on the food system challenge, and we need to find ways to release that pressure. We need to find ways to make sure that the level of decision making is the same level where ecological impacts are felt. Consumers in urban areas are very far from the origins of that food. So the true cost of food, which is a phrase that is thrown around quite a bit, is relatively unknown to those consumers. So that's going to be kind of the key to some very general solutions that we've developed. Another key, just to show that this is not all bad news, is that we do not utilize the biological resources for food consumption and within our food system. The FAO has estimated, and this is another figure that is very, very widely cited, that 75% of caloric intake comes from very few plants and very few animals. They say that up to 3 cover more than 50% of the diets, and that is more true when you're talking about poorer groups. The availability of plant and animal calories as sources is incredible. There are new fruits that become popular in urban areas almost every year. And that's a positive trend, because that will lead to increased value of those areas and increased value for biodiversity. If we look just briefly at this figure, we have each region, and we have their relative diversity in terms of cropland and their area devoted to agricultural use. We've said that we don't want to increase this area anymore. So we want that area to remain fixed, but we want the diversity to increase in terms of the production. It's interesting, Asia has increased, for example, both area and diversity. But as a contrary example, Latin America has increased the area which is used for agricultural production, but the diversity has actually decreased. So this is largely due to soy production. Actually, on these arrows are mislabeled, so I'm sorry about that. It's the contrary. But the lack of diversity in Latin America is largely due to the growth of soy and soybeans significantly in Brazil and throughout the region, which are a high value crop, but we need to start thinking about the cost that those crops have in terms of their biological impact. Solving the food system conundrum from the rural-urban linkages perspective requires an approach that attacks at 2 key points, and those are with the producers and consumers in the food system. The producers need incentives that encourage them to produce food sources that reflect the biodiversity available to them and minimize externalities and other environmental costs. That can be done through technology. Technology has proven to help greatly with minimizing use of some resources. For example, water, precision agriculture can be used to minimize water use. soil levels can be measured, and crops can be planted and developed in line with those nutrients. Technology is, in our mind, a key way that we can effectively do more with less. That's almost the definition of technology. But to do that, significant investments are needed. The FAO and others estimate that a huge proportion of the agricultural producers are family farms. Those farmers do not have any resources, and they don't have any incentives to not go and cut more cropland or burn more forests. So we need to make sure that those tools get down to the smallest possible level, which is a small level in terms of the size of actual farms, but a huge level if you sum all of those farms together. The key to all these changes is that the cost structures on the productive side need to reflect the externalities that the system creates. Those externalities are in all the natural resources that we've discussed: water, soil. Those resources don't have costs to the users in many cases, but they do have costs globally. On the consumer side, many of the solutions go in the same line, but I think one of the key solutions is information. The consumers don't, if you're in a city and you're in an urban area and you're ordering your food via delivery 2 or 3 times a day, you have very little idea of the real costs that are going into that food. You don't know exactly what you're eating. There are a lot of technologies that have improved that. Labeling technologies and the use of blockchain can make huge advances in that. That's basically saying, I want to buy coffee that comes from farm X in Costa Rica, and you can have certainty that that is the case. So that information is key, and again, technology is a key way to transmit that information. Investment is also required there because technology growth is large, but a significant part of that information remains in private hands. If you use apps to order groceries, especially during COVID, it's the app that has that information. You have some information on what's available to you, but the app has all the information about what you like at a certain point of a day, what you like when it's hot, what you like when it's cold, all these things. And that information is private, which serves a purpose in the private sector, but it also has public relevance. So that's something that I think needs to be rethought. Again, cost structures need to reflect the externalities on the consumer side. And again, information. I think we'll hear more about information coming up, but everyone talks about big data. We know a lot of things, but we don't know the right things. A significant amount of data is pictures, video games. It's not from natural sources. We still have a very poor understanding of exactly how our food system works down at the molecular level. And I think that's something that we could develop significant resources to in the future. Thank you. That's the presentation.
Thank you so much, Paul, for a fascinating presentation. Definitely the food systems will make a huge difference there. And I can see that a lot of exchanges are also going on in the chat space. So please feel free also to share examples. I see one very interesting about education and schools and feeding, because we all know that our children are losing contact with the reality that you just shared with us, Paul. So it's important to bring this all to people's reality. Thank you very much. As a next speaker, and going to another huge urban-rural linkage, we would like to invite Kate Newman to talk to us a little bit from infrastructure, hopefully as well, because if you look at food infrastructure, and then we'll have water, 3 very important linkages. So Kate, thank you again, WWF, for having contributed, and thank you also for your leadership role in the issue of infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure. You and I have been working on this in parallel. Over to you, Kate, please. You need to unmute yourself.
And I will unmute myself and share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Okay, thank you. I was really quite intrigued and pleased to get this invitation today to speak. And it brought to mind the fact that my very first paying job after being a Peace Corps volunteer was to work in the Congo on a farm to market road project for the United States Agency for International Development. So I think, it's this full circle problem challenge that I've been able to work on kind of my whole career, because I've gone from that development orientation into conservation and now really trying to think deeply about how infrastructure is affecting the ability of the planet to persist and to provide us the services that we cherish. So thinking about farm to market, then market to urban, it's really fun today. It's exciting, and I'm so fascinated by these discussions. And I'm going to, as you said, focus on the infrastructure agenda in this continuum. From the guidelines that you provided, the integrated planning continuum is where I'm going to focus my discussion today. Starting with the context of cities. They sit, as everybody's been saying, within a context of nature. Nature is providing tons of services. Nature is also being impacted by things like climate change, our own development practices, and the shifting use of resources as we change our needs change and our interests change. And that's really becoming apparent with the COVID situation, where we may be relying less on accessing food from around the world and trying to access food closer by in the food sheds and protecting the watersheds right around our cities. But that context includes natural infrastructure. As I've just been describing, we have systems that are already supplying materials, flows like water, clean air, and the natural resources that we rely on, including for intrinsic values, such as the wildlife that you see in this picture. These systems can't be replicated, but at great cost to humans. When we try to recreate what nature's engineering provides us, it costs a lot of money. And one of the best examples of that is New York City's water system, which many of you hear about as one of these great examples. When they tried to replace their water filtration system with a mechanical version, they realized it would be cheaper to go up and protect those reservoirs and lakes that they've been depending on, working with those communities up there to provide that source to the big city of New York. So we're living in a context of natural infrastructure that needs to be maintained. But infrastructure as we build it, the physical, impermeable, hard, structured infrastructure that we rely on, is so different from natural infrastructure, which needs to flow, which needs to be moving genetically, it needs to be moving physically, and migration patterns need to persist and so on. Nature needs to be able to move. Our infrastructure doesn't move. This is a map a Danish economist was working on, showing that the Roman roads indicate that, and many of them are still used, that they basically indicated where populations were going to be persisting into the next 2 millennia. Those roads really did drive economic development that remained. In the African context below, the story was interesting, where the people stopped using wheeled vehicles and started focusing on camels. You had less of that persistence. But where we continued to use wheeled vehicles, we continued to have roads. And the implication there is, once you make a decision like this, it's permanent. It's going to impact the space that it's in. And we need to be super careful from now forward on where we do build infrastructure. This is a recent global map of where we've put our roads so far. You don't see very much space in between those roads for other things to occur, like that natural infrastructure I just described. So the big question now between cities in an intra-urban, given that each city relies on that context, are we paying enough attention to how we plan the use of the landscape between each city to continue to deliver the services and allow the freedom of movement of goods and services and For the Romans, it was military. For Eisenhower, it was military readiness. Then it was trade. And of course, my agriculture example. These are all important for our development, but are we going to allow nature to persist while we move our roads and stuff across the landscape? One of the great challenges with how we develop infrastructure, and particularly transport infrastructure between cities, is that the perspective is, as we call it, the engineer's handshake, as the crow flies. Straight is cheap, straight is faster, just go through a landscape without necessarily thinking about what's in that landscape that you're going to want to maintain for delivery of services in the future. That is called mitigation. So the drive is to create the road from an engineering cost point of view, then think about, oh yeah, maybe there's a watershed or something I need to work on. Then we'll try to mitigate, or even go ahead and build the road and save a wetland somewhere else. That kind of thinking is now undermining so many of the ecosystem services we have, because the priority isn't about delivery of the services to humanity moving forward. The priority is, let's get that road from A to B in the cheapest way. So that kind of future thinking about how that landscape is going to be needed for delivery of services to this two cities on either side of that road needs to change. So that's the integrated territorial landscape, larger scale thinking of how our resources are going to be managed into the future. There are ways to do this that we're thinking about more and more. There's a really solid increasing interest, especially since Rio Plus 20 in natural capital. The CBD convention has an emphasis on spatial planning. This spatial planning can, as we've just heard, really help in planning for things like agriculture. And for example, there's a great study by Bomford in the Mekong, which showed that the historic placement of the roads was not optimal for agriculture. And the roads don't tend to be moved. So you're basically not optimizing future agricultural production if you follow simple dictates like security and trade routes, and not think about how you can use the landscape and the infrastructure to enhance agricultural production and diminish impacts on other resource bases like water provision or soil security. We've been looking at using the concept called service shed, using Invest as a tool. This is a spatial planning tool that looks at how ecosystems actually function. And this is just a brief example where the little yellow dotted white line down the middle is a road through a very pristine environment in Myanmar, from the coast to the border of Thailand. It's a road that's being developed right now through prime tiger habitat, so WWF's worried about that, but it's also in an area of the Karen people who have a very integrated relationship with the natural system there, and they're not that interested in seeing that undermined by this big road, which is only being developed for trade purposes, and it has no interest in providing services along the route. It's a thoroughfare type of highway in one of the massive economic corridors of Asia. The idea in this picture, which I think is really cool, is engineers have this tendency to look at what's in the immediate vicinity of a road that they're allowed to build. We have very little, we've been learning that there's very little ecological training, certainly no wildlife friendly training in road development. But this picture is more practical. This is service sheds for sediment retention. All the way upstream in that watershed, if those forests are removed, there's going to be an enormous amount of sediment that will flow down and basically destroy the bridges that they've built with scouring from large rocks and soil and other kinds of sediment. And so actually the way that the infrastructure, that the landscape is treated upstream from a road will have a huge impact on the road itself. So not only would we be talking about planning for improving the environment and maintaining services such as water provision or even wildlife for intrinsic value. We're also talking about enhancing the ability of the road to persist by looking more broadly at how the landscape functions and how it will impact your own road. So this kind of reflection going up into the landscape about how our infrastructure can persist for our services as well as the services nature continues to provide requires this kind of broad thinking. I'm just going to give, in closing, a couple of examples where this has been going on with really interesting outcomes. In the case of Myanmar, where this is taking place, the Ministry of Construction has been very interested in how this ecosystem function and wildlife works. And so they've been now asking for training to train their engineers on how to bring those services into their work. And in similar cases around the world, we're seeing more and more interest from the hard engineering community to integrate this thinking for the sake of their investments and for the sake of the communities around and for the sake of the cities they're trying to reach. So these are just a brief example. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to the continued discussion.
Thank you so much, Kate. Again, it's a fascinating subject. In a different webinar, I was talking the other day about, because in front of my street here in Montreal, they started to redo the street. And one of the things we don't usually get is the volume of concrete that we have under our cities, particularly in developing countries. It is, my estimate is that we're wasting 1/3 to 1/4 of the concrete that we're pouring in because it's not necessary. There is a huge kind of blueprint effect. People are, just as you said, they're doing it exactly as they're always doing, and rethinking the development of infrastructure might be one of the most effective ways to take advantage of urban-rural linkages. So thank you for that. I can see that there's questions already for some of the speakers, and I just wanted to check with you, Camilo, whether we do the questions now or we go on to all the presentations and then we go back to the questions. Just share that with me.
I guess there was a question for Paul, but he kindly already responded directly on the chat. I think we can just continue with Angel to the next presentation, and then if time allows at the end of the discussion, we can transmit more questions to the speakers.
Very well. In that case, Angel, it is my pleasure to invite you, and I want to salute and congratulate the community of Madrid for having recently begun a very ambitious and I would say a very exciting experience of cooperation with the Secretariat and other subnational governments and other communities like you. So go ahead, and I'm looking forward to the experience of both the Arco Verde and the issue of water in Madrid. Please go ahead, Angel.
Thank you, Olivier. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting the Comunidad de Madrid to take part in this webinar. It's very important for us to present this project, Arco Verde, Green Arch, that is just under development in its first stages. And I think it's quite interesting for the reason that is a project in a very peculiar region in Spain, probably with some similarities with other European and international regions. And well, let me share the screen. Just a moment, please. Well. Okay. Well, Arco Verde or Green Arch is a project developed by the Comunidad de Madrid. I'm sure you all know the city of Madrid, the capital city of Spain with 3.2 million inhabitants, and well known worldwide by Prado Museum, tapas, or nightlife. But the region of Madrid is not so well known in the world, so I would like to present you some information about the region. Madrid, la Comunidad de Madrid, is one of the 17 autonomous communities that exist in Spain, and it was the latest to be created in 1983. It's a very small region, 8,000 square kilometers, but it has a very high population. It's about 7 million inhabitants. It makes that in the region we have a big concentration of people living in the central area of the region, of this triangle. That's the city of Madrid and the surrounding municipalities in the metropolitan area, where lives more or less 6.6 million inhabitants. That creates a big contrast between the city of Madrid with its 3.2 million inhabitants and some municipalities in this area of the region, where you can find small villages like La Iruela with only 42 inhabitants. Even being so small, the city of Madrid has a very big differences between the different parts of the regions. In the left part, which is the west part, the western part of the region, we have the ranges, the Sierra de Gredos, Sierra de Guadarrama, Sierra de Somosierra. Then we have the valley from the rivers, where we have the Jarama rivers, Henares River, Manzanares River, Guadarrama River, that all of them are tributary to the Tagus River that ends its way in Lisbon and creates a big valley where the people live in the region. And we have also the southeastern part where there are some moors and some dry grasslands where cereals are cultivated or grown, and it's the more maybe agricultural part of the region. There are big differences between the climate in the region from the range, where you can find heavy rains and low temperatures, and the southeast part where you can find hot weather and a very dry climate. So there are differences between 10 degrees below zero in the range to 44 to 45 degrees Celsius over zero in these areas. That's important because this topographical distribution makes that all the water that provides the water supply system in the region comes from this area. Lozoya River is a small river tributary to the Jarama River, and there are 14 reservoirs there to provide water supply to the city of Madrid and the surrounding areas. So for us, it's very important to keep this part of the region very well kept in order to protect our main resource, that's water. Even being a so populated region, so small, we have more than 50% of our surface protected under a legal figure of protection, regional, national, European, or international. So we are well over the objective stated in the European Green Deal of 35% of territory protected by 2030, and we have 15 points over this objective. So you can see we have a national park. We are the only city in Europe that has a national park, a 1 hour drive from the city center of Madrid. It's Parque Nacional de Guadarrama. We have 3 regional parks, and we have also some international figures of protection like Ramsar Convention, wetlands, and also areas of special interest from the European Union, especially for birds in this area. So let's talk about the Arco Verde green arch. First of all, when you see, when you think about a green arch, you're thinking something that is not a circle. Green arch is really a green belt, but it has an explanation. In the first moment, it was intended to establish a link between the 3 regional parks, just covering these parts of the belt. But after that, we decided to close the circle through this area to create a ring, a belt around the metropolitan area of Madrid. So, well, we kept the name Green Arch, but in fact, it's a green belt around the metropolitan area of Madrid. This is an integral project. It works with green infrastructure, biodiversity, mobility, climate adaptation, invasive species, forest, and social participation. And it has some key elements that defines the project. For the first, we can talk about connectivity. This is a project that has close links to the citizens of the metropolitan area, in the sense that it's connected with bike lanes in some parts of the belt of the ring, but it is important because it has also communication through public transport system. Madrid has a very big system of public transportation, and you will get access to this Green Arch project through commuter train, but also by underground, through Metro Sur, Metro Ligero, all the underground of the city of Madrid. But it's also a project that works on biodiversity. We are working with 30 forest areas that already exist, but we will create 25 new biodiversity areas, and we will work to recover 8 river sections to improve the biodiversity, but also the social access to them. In terms of biodiversity, we will work to protect birds, pollinators, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, and so on. And we'll also develop programs to control and manage invasive species like raccoon, island toos, and so on. This is a project that pretends to give access to the nature to the citizens. So it's important that we have the possibility to use soft modes of mobility. So we are based mainly in a network of paths, a network of paths already exist, but we need to be improved to let all kind of people gain access to the Arco Verde. In this sense, we will improve these paths in order to get all the people, whatever their condition, can get there and enjoy the nature. So we will have very good area to move, but also we will plan to establish resting areas where you can stay, just enjoy of nature, but also do some physical activity or some other activities like to have your lunch or to enjoy with your friends. They are playing in the fields. But there is also a very important part of forest works in the sense of improve the nature. You know that Madrid and the cities that surround the capital city was developed mainly in the 60s, last century. So the urban planning was not very good. So there is a critical lack of green spaces in the cities. And we need to improve to provide people with some way to access to nature. Nature in the city of Madrid, in the region of Madrid, is the typical Mediterranean biodiversity. So we will plant 540,000 trees and shrubs in order to recover the natural tree cover that existed some centuries ago in this center part of the Peninsula Iberica. But it's not only a question of planting trees, but also to keep it and keep them in good conditions. So for 3 years, we will water these plantations, and we will replace all the dead trees. That's quite frequent in this part of Spain because the climate is quite hard and very difficult to planted trees to grow. But it's also a social project. As I said before, we try to offer access to people to the nature, to the rural areas that surrounds the metropolitan area of Madrid, but it must be supported by environmental educations that will be developed in 4 environmental centers that we have already in the Green Arc. 2 of them are pure nature educational center oriented to activities in the nature, and the other 2 are placed in peri-urban parks and are more educative in the sense to explain mainly children and young people the cycles of nature, but all of them will develop a global project to improve the knowledge of this project, Arco Verde, but also its meaning in the sense of environmental, social, and economical importance. And it's important also that this project will establish a link between 9 cultural heritage zones that will enhance the value of this project. It's a big project, so it will be developed in a period of 4 to 5 years in 3 phases. The phase number 1 will be include the actions that can be developed because the land is owned by the community of Madrid. The phase number 2, the second phase, we will work with the local entities, and phase number 3, we will try to get into the project some peri-urban areas, and we are studying the way to get it in the project. Phase 1, it's very important for us, not only because it's the easiest to develop, but also because of its significance. We will work just in the vías pecuarias, it's livestock ways that was created in 13th century by the Mesta, the Breeders Association, and vías pecuarias was the ways that livestock was moved from north to south in summertime and wintertime, just looking for pastures for the animals. So it's a resource, public resource, it's submitted to great pressures because depending on the type of via pecuaria, it has a width of 92 meters to a smaller one. But in the past, there was a great pressure to build roads, pathways, houses, and so on. So Arco Verde will keep these vías pecuarias, these livestock ways, preserved and conserved for the future. We will work also in public utility woodlands. These are forests that are maintained by and owned by the Comunidad de Madrid, and they are not used to get resources like wood, but for its environmental values, to protect the soil, to protect the water, and as biodiversity refuges. And well, we will get these woodlands into the project when it pass by close to them, and we will part of the green belt that is not only a belt, a way, but also it will have some expansion areas to link the way with the nature surrounding the green arc. We will incorporate also peri-urban parks. There are 3 big peri-urban parks in the south part of Madrid that will be connected by this project. And there is also another source of land, that's all the paths owned by Canal de Isabel II and La Dirección General de Carreteras, the road managers, that provide a lot of territory to work with. Canal de Isabel II is the public company that supplies water, drinking water to Madrid, Comunidad de Madrid, and the company managed the 14 reservoirs that exist in the northern part of the city and the region, in the sierras, in the range, and it has a lot of infrastructure connected to provide the water to the region. And there is a lot of paths very well preserved because they are close to the public, and well, as part of the project, this path will be open and forested to become part of the project. The second phase, we will work with local councils. We have agreements with 25 municipalities around Madrid and the city of Madrid, just to make intervention in public roads, in public ways in these municipalities. It will provide us the authorization to develop the project in these roads belonging to the councils, and we will plant the trees and shrubs and develop all the activities there. And well, we are discussing now who will maintain these parts of the green arc, the the city councils or the community of Madrid. And finally, we will find in phase 3, we will work in the incorporation to the project of large peri-urban areas that now are under study. One of them is La Cantueña, a green land of 70 hectares that is in the south of Madrid. We are close to get an agreement, and we are working also with the Confederación Hidrográfica del Tajo, the national organism depending of the environment minister, to get access and incorporate to the project La Ribera del Arroyo Culebro. Arroyo Culebro is a small river that goes in the south part of Madrid metropolitan area that has been subject of wastewater basin from the municipalities and was in very, very bad condition. Now it's recovered, but the water is clean, but there is no river in the sense that there is no vegetation, and it's quite hard to see. So we will try to get into the project to gain a new river with its river trees and so on, incorporated into the project. In a nutshell, just to provide you with some data, Green Art means more than 200 kilometers of intervention. We will plant 540,000 trees and shrubs. We will connect 55 forest areas, 30 that already exist. We will create 25 new areas. We will work to combat exotic species like Ailanthus, raccoon, Argentinian parakeet, and so on. We will develop 40 hectares of green corridors and 360 hectares of biodiversity areas. And we will improve 5,000 hectares of green structures in the metropolitan area to provide a service, natural services to 4.5 million inhabitants in the metropolitan area. Arco Verde is just the beginning of a long-term project. Arco Verde will be the pillar of the future green infrastructure network of the Community of Madrid, a future network of natural and semi-natural areas with ecosystem systems to conserve the regional biodiversity. It's an infrastructure with a network that will try to link the metropolitan area, the rural and the natural environment, just to not only provide environmental values, but also social and economical values. And I think that it's very important also that this Green Arc reached to connect the new expanded biosphere reserve that exists in the three rivers basins that exist in the region, and create a big reserve that well, makes us to work to keep them as well as we can, and well, to provide to all the Madrileans, to all the visitors, with green spaces, green services, and well, a balance between the urban life that is the main characteristic of our region, but also a very, very valuable and special natural values that are also present in the region because of its topography and the efforts made by the different administration to keep it in the best possible state. I can just say, to finish, say that the state of the biodiversity in the region has improved in the last 40 years. And now you can find in Madrid some emblematic species like eagles, falcons, storks, and so on, in a much better condition than when the Comunidad de Madrid was created in 1983. That's all. Well, you have any question? I'll be happy to answer it.
Thank you very much, Angel. Thank you. This is very interesting. It's a very exciting movement and a strategic positioning, very ambitious. And I hope that we can all learn from the experience. And I was sharing also, Angel, in the chat, the excellent work of Canal de Isabel II, because I think that's a very important player. The public corporations that supply water to cities, particularly the larger ones, they can play a tremendous role in sustainability. Thank you very much. And as a last contributor today, before the opening the floor for questions, I'd like to invite Georgie Carino. The call for that is that Georgie has been for many, many years extremely active in the Convention on Biological Diversity, defending the perspective and the rights and the concerns of indigenous people and local communities. As we know, more than 50% of indigenous peoples and local communities today already live in cities and urban settlements. They face the same trend of urbanization, and there is a big risk of the urbanization of indigenous people and local communities happening without social and environmental safeguards, and with the risk of losing the tremendous traditional knowledge and experience of indigenous people and local communities. So basically the challenge is, how do we urbanize in a way that respects that and that learns from urbanization that has gone over for thousands and thousands of years, and where a lot of different cultures have different experiences. So Georgie, please share with us some of your thoughts regarding urban-rural linkages. Go ahead, please.
Thanks very much for inviting me to this webinar or this conversation. And indeed, I'd like to put the context of urbanization and indigenous peoples into a systems framework for us to understand the necessary transformations that are needed in this issue of urban-rural linkages, right? I think we can honestly say that urbanization has been built on the back of indigenous peoples since colonial times and continuing until today. I mean, for example, great cities like Montreal, New York, San Francisco, my own city, Baguio City here in the Philippines, which is the summer capital, are completely built on the lands of indigenous people. So indeed, urbanization has displaced many indigenous peoples, but the continuing footprint of the cities is also displacing indigenous peoples in the food that's eaten, in the cutting, in the deforestation that's happening. So I think all of us in this conversation understand well the impacts of the city on biodiversity and ecosystems as a whole, and land, water, etc. So I'd like to put into more granular context exactly how cities and indigenous peoples are interacting, right? Oliver said that indigenous peoples are now 50% urbanized. No, in fact, it's only 25%. But in some regions like Latin America and in some of the more industrialized countries, also in the Pacific region, it is indeed already tipping towards 50%. But it is still 75-25%. And these are the most recent studies done by the ILO, the International Labor Organization, right? However, despite the fact that the number of indigenous peoples is more or less 475 million, but this comprises the bulk of the cultural diversity in the world, also in terms of languages. And for those who are stuck in the CBD negotiations, you may know that indigenous peoples actually manage and control 25% of our terrestrial land area. However, that land security is not yet, that land is not yet secure. And it is that land insecurity that's driving a lot of the food expansion, the agricultural frontier, let's say, the agricultural frontier that is basically the agro-industrial frontier, right? So, and most of the indigenous peoples, exactly because of the construction of our economic system, because we still live in the rural areas, are among the most materially poor if you just look at incomes. But of course, we are very rich in terms of the biodiversity, which nevertheless is continues to be taken away. Therefore, we need to see exactly this relationship between cities and the rural areas in a more granular way in order to actually manage that urban rural divide, right? So I will take an example of my own city where I'm now locked in because of the pandemic, and just see some of the trends, but also some of the actions that the communities in the cities are taking in order to address these problems, right? So my city is Baguio City, and because my ancestors and the people in the uplands were called Igorots, successfully repulsed the Spanish colonization, who were mainly after gold. We continue to retain our cultural, economic, and political systems. And this is why we are indigenous peoples in the Philippines. So we're not ethnically different from other Filipinos, but we are culturally different because we were not Christianized. But because we are in the uplands, when the Americans took over from the Spanish after the Spanish-American War, they decided to make this area into their summer capital, like the hill station, because of its very nice climate, right? So from a situation at 1900, where the city was inhabited by 29 extended households, these were the Ibaloy families, including my great-great-grandfather. The city has now grown over this period to 350,000 population. But the city, when it was planned as a summer capital, and it was very well planned by the American architects, was actually planned for 25,000 population to grow into an educational center, a trade center, and political center, an administrative center for the so here we have a situation where the original inhabitants were pushed out to the margins, and we now, most of the original populations are now in the periphery, whereas the best lands are owned by the richest in the Philippines, because they want to have nice big houses, vacation houses in the city, right? So we have a very lopsided development where the rich have controlled all of the land, and this is the case in most cities, where real estate has gone up so high that it's very hard actually to own property, and we have the problem of urban poor, right? So that was the growth in the population, but it is actually the main city within a region, which is the upland area, which is inhabited by mostly indigenous peoples. So here we have the possibility of great planning and management of these urban-rural linkages, because the administrative and political center of the region is also located in the city, primarily of indigenous peoples, right? Both in the city and in the region itself, right? So on the one hand, the presence of indigenous peoples in cities, and I know this is also true in other cities around the world, it introduces strength of the city, which is actually cultural diversity. And that is one of the reasons why people enjoy cities, is because of the networks, learning, and connectivity that happens there. And when that connectivity is and networking is well planned for, then you can actually see a situation of the cities contributing a lot also to the rural areas. And I know this is easier to say because indigenous communities, even when we move to the cities, the urban indigenous populations continue to retain very strong linkages with their homeland, right? And the linkages are both ways. In fact, the food linkages go both ways. Food from the urban rural areas continue to support communities in the cities, and food systems in the cities are also contributing to food within the communities, the different types of food in addition to the traditional food. And also the fact that incomes from the city are also serving the rural areas means that there is also supplementary income for the rural areas. I mean, we know that migration even goes beyond subnational areas to way abroad. But we need to understand how, under the current inequalities, a lot of people are actually supporting the rural areas because they are in the city through remittances, but also through direct economic transfers, right? And at least in my city now, I'll talk about some of the initiatives by the communities, including the urban poor communities. There is a revitalization of the traditional food systems. For example, among the Ibaloy, I'm Ibaloy, we always had the baeng or the home garden as part of our as part of our food, and it's also a cultural system and exchange, right? So now that we are understanding the importance of biodiversity in cities, there is a revitalization of local food systems, even in the city. But the nice thing about this is that biodiversity, the traditional foods that are more present in the rural areas are also being cultivated in the cities because those who have come to the city know those traditional foods, right? And one of the interesting developments during COVID-19 was that because we have a lot of farmers in the Cordillera region, because this is an upland area and we supply most of the temperate vegetables, fruits, and even flowers, right? Because of our different climate, the breakdown in the mainstream supply system really created a big problem for our farmers. And what happened was that authorities in the cities, both local authorities, but also social welfare authorities, created a direct link with the farmers who wanted to sell their vegetables, right? So in fact, the crisis in sale of local products was addressed by a direct linkage between real cities and really the growers, right? And we will see if that will continue well after the current lockdown and the pandemic. And this was also true of communities in northern Thailand. The rural communities in northern Thailand were sending food to indigenous communities in the cities who were undergoing scarcity as well as lack of food. And so there was a flow of food through community channels towards families that were in the city. And they even innovated another experience of indigenous in the coastal areas exchanging with rice from the mountain areas. So in fact, the pandemic has revived a lot of the cultural and social systems that are needed. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the food systems. I won't go much longer because I know we don't have much time. But we really need to understand this in a systemic way. It is not enough to say that we have all of these problems in the rural areas, despite the fact that small farmers are the ones feeding a greater part of the population of the world, right? Our economic system has to reorient its incentives, not to the big agricultural industrial farms like soybeans or beef, etc. But we really have to support those small farmers, because supporting them will actually create a big impact in terms of transformations in the food system. They cannot continue to bear the costs, all the costs of the destruction, say, of biodiversity, but instead should be understood as real contributors and real actors in this current situation. So yeah, we don't have much time to really go much more deeply into these more granular as well as more systemic kinds of solutions. But I hope that the experience from my own city is able to contribute to this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Georgie, for these inputs and for your this fascinating presentation that contributes a lot to this conversation. Indeed, we don't have so much time, and we would like all to continue discussing these topics in depth. But yes, we have to continue. So I just would like to ask Paul and Kate, and also you, Georgie and Angel, to provide us some takeaways of this session, like concluding remarks. We are not able to have like a discussion as we would like. We just have to, therefore, I will just want to give you the floor once again. So Paul, would you like to start?
Thank you, Camilo, and thanks to the rest for a very interesting set of panelists and discussion, which has been mostly in the chat, but it's been vigorous. Just in terms of closing remarks, I think one key thing to remember, especially when thinking about food systems, is if anyone claims to say they have a solution that will work in every situation, they're definitely wrong. As I tried to outline at the beginning in detail, the food system is so complex and is made of so many interlocking parts that vary based on geography, supply, demand, an incredible number of factors. There are no strong solutions. For example, if we want a new and diverse food supply, some people say we have to start, producing things like avocados rather than soy. Everyone in agriculture says soy is the bad crop, and other new crops, for example, avocados are good, but avocados are incredibly resource heavy in terms of water. They're creating drought areas where there were no drought areas. They're changing ecodynamics around the world. So moderation in everything. And just to respond to something that's been more of the discussion in the chat, production is not the goal. Providing nutritious and adequate food supply is the goal. And those two things are often not in line. Production can be much stronger in some areas. A nutritious diet could be produced with a much less than what we produce, but we're talking about projections. So the key is there are no overall solutions, especially in the food system, but we need to look at a lot of bottom up and micro solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just want to inform you that Oliver, he was moderating the discussion, so he had to leave. So that's why I'm just taking on his role. just to make it clear. But yeah, so Kate, do you have any final remarks for this meeting? Some takeaways? What's the way forward for this discussion? Any final thought? Thank you very much.
Sure. This is really fascinating. I learned a lot, and will hope to get in touch with some of you working on things that overlap with infrastructure. It's funny about infrastructure. It's sort of like the invisible hand in a way. It's not really well integrated into how people plan for things. You see it as an already existing, oh, I have my road, I go to work, my road is fine. But to plan infrastructure out has huge implications. And it's surprising to me that it hasn't been a bigger issue, say, in the decades past. But perhaps that's because of its complexity. As Paul was saying about agriculture, planning for infrastructure is really complex. But what we're now understanding, and even in this past 5 years or so, maybe since the SDGs, actually, that infrastructure needs to shift. And there's a lot of interest in the investment sector. And even as I described with the case of the Myanmar government construction ministry, interested in change. And they are interested in being involved in this broader practice, cross-ministerial, interministerial approach to things. So this program and a lot of what you guys have been describing, my peers on the panel, has been about bringing different parties together to understand what the optimal choices that we have for the future. And this is not the way decision-making has traditionally gone. It has to be the way of the future. And especially, as Joji says in the end, listening to the indigenous people, they may not want a highway nearby. They may not want access to a big paved road if that means people are bringing in the kinds of social change that they're not interested in. Can they be listened to? Can we all help with that? These are all parts of the same puzzle, and I think most of them are outlined in the guidelines for urban-rural linkages that you've produced. So I'm excited to be able to use those moving forward myself.
That's great to hear that, Kate. Actually, that's one of the main goals that these urban-rural linkages guiding principles serves as a framework for many economic sectors, like including, as you mentioned, infrastructure, agriculture, because actually each one of these sectors have their own complexities, but it's also very important to have a common framework to find like common points and guiding principles, actually to start managing like not only the complexities of each one of these economic sectors, but also to protecting biodiversity and so on. But I would like to continue with Angel to provide, please Angel, do you have any final thought, concluding remarks, takeaway for this meeting?
Well, I live in a region that's characterized by the heavy weight of the urban phenomenon. In fact, agriculture represents less than 0.2% of the gross product. So in economic terms, it's irrelevant. But agriculture in Madrid provides a lot of services like food, quality food, the water, clean air, and it's also the place where we put our wastewater, and our air pollution, for instance. So to promote better knowledge of the rural, and the people living in cities, to the people who doesn't know what represents just to open the tap to get to fill a glass of water, will be very important to keep these services that provide the rural surrounding of the city, the hinterland, but also to make these people living of rural activities, living in the small villages around Madrid, have a life full of dignity, opportunities, and elections. When you talk, Olivier, about water supply, we cannot imagine that it means to have a dam 100-meter high, where you have a reservoir, kilometers of tubes, which send the water to a potabilization plant. There are a lot of kilometers of tuberies that make pipes that make the water accessible to every single house in the city. And when we open the tap and let the water run, we don't think that this water have to go back to the rivers and lakes and the sea. And probably knowing what it represents and what's the impact in our lives, but also in the people living where we get the water in the catchment, probably will be as more responsible and more empathetic with the people living in the rural areas. So I think it's important to promote this knowledge between urban citizens, to let them understand the real value of rural areas and natural areas for their everyday lives.
Thank you for these words, Angel. It's always good to hear that. Just want to give the floor to Joji for your final remarks, and then we can conclude the meeting. I think we have extended a little bit more as planned, but yeah. Joji, please, are you here with us?
I think we need to give greater value to cultural heritage, to heritage values in the city. Because if we are to make people truly live in a place and have a relationship with a place, they also have to be in touch with the heritage values, both material heritage, natural heritage, as well as cultural heritage. Because it is easy to use up resources when you're not very connected to a place, right? And for example, food cultures in the city, I mean, these are all important things that let the citizens become truly in touch with biodiversity and with nature. So I think that element can be further developed. Thank you.
Thanks, Joji, for highlighting this. Yeah, definitely, there is a lot of value in cultural heritage, and we should continue working on this regard. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Remy Sietchipin to deliver us like the final remarks, some takeaways from this meeting. So Remy, are you here with us?
Hello, Camilo, can you hear me?
Yes, Remy, I can hear you. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Camilo. Thanks to you all, from Oliver to all the presenters. I think this is, again, yet another interesting, very useful discussion we have been having in this series to connect the dots from different angles, different partners. And today we have seen how we can come together to discuss the importance of biodiversity, and biodiversity being seen here, as we have heard in the case of the Philippines, that goes beyond the nature, that talk about the people. So that's very powerful way of also understanding the connection that it's about people, it's about places. And I think we have been able to discuss this. This again shows how the urban rural linkages, I would say, discourse or approach could be so interesting to bring different perspectives that we have seen throughout the discussion in linking the green infrastructure to connect with food, to connect with technology, to connect with nature-based solutions, to look at the importance of land, for instance, what does it mean, and the cultural dimension of what you are doing. So again, excellent job in ensuring that we use the approach of linking places, the territorial approach, some will call it, to bring out important issues and to know that we are all connected. And we have to do so not only through the work we do, we carry on, in our own perspective, and I think someone made a very good suggestion here that if we when you use the water, we know where it's come from and what will be the repercussion. So we are not alone. So we always have to understand that urban rural linkages is about connection. We are all connected in one way or the other, wherever the place we are. So well done. As UN Habitat, we don't take this for granted that so many of you have stayed on for over an hour and 40 minutes. But we appreciate that this discussion on urban rural linkages is really anchoring many of your discussions, and we'll be very much happy to keep engaging with you and many others in this journey of ensuring that people and places are well connected. So congratulations, and we look forward to the next webinar to engage further on the urban rural linkages. I think we're gonna have another one coming up soon. And Camilo, if you have registered, we're gonna be sharing all the upcoming discussions on this and all the products that are coming out of this engagement on urban rural linkages. So again, to Camilo and all the urban rural linkages team from UN Habitat and CBD and other partners, thank you very much and congratulations. Have a good day, evening, and morning. Bye-bye. Over to you, Camilo.
Thank you very much, Remy. Yeah, indeed. I just want to add on what just Remy mentioned, that this webinar, it's starting for this discussion that it's complex and it has many entry points. And I just want to say that, yeah, this is also like starting point to announce and to the launch the work that we are starting to do at UN Habitat. And I would like to thanks also like to the speakers. I will follow up with you, like to keep informing the discussion, and also to all the people that was here, that feel free to reach out to us to inform like this very important but also very complex discussion, and as many points of view that we can have and information that we can have on this will be very much appreciated. So yeah, with that word, I just want to close this meeting for today, and wish you all like a good evening and afternoon and morning, depending on where you are. So bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Georgie, bye, Kate, Paul, thanks again, and Remy also. Bye bye to all.